Okay, today we're going to be making fresh veggie salsa. And I've already done a few things before we get started today, and that is to rinse my vegetables thoroughly and then dry them off, which has already been done, so you won't see me doing that in this video because I've already done that earlier. But I've got 4 tomatoes that I will be cutting up, 1 good sized jalapeno, some cilantro, and an onion. These are going to be my veggies that are going to go in here, and then I'm going to add a few other ingredients to make this come together. So let's go ahead and get started with cutting. So I'm just going to take some of those off my cutting board so I don't have quite so much going on. All right, so let's get started. So I'm going to cut off the end of the tomato, and there's still quite a bit of usable tomato here, so I'm just going to cut around that stem piece, and then I'll just get rid of that. Toss that in my sink. And then I can begin cutting my tomato. And I can save a little bit of time by stacking it if I want. I might just do 2 here. So how thick or how thin you want this is a little bit in your control here, because the thinner you slice it, obviously, you can do that. It's going to create a little more juice the thinner you go. Or you can go, obviously, thicker. Just be careful about your fingers, obviously. You don't want to hurt yourself. And this salsa is not going to be necessarily like thin, like a pureed type thing like you might see at a Mexican restaurant. It's going to be a little bit chunkier, kind of like pico. See my consistency here. So now I've got more to go here. Be careful with this so you don't hurt yourself. So I'm just going to keep dicing this up. And the recipe calls for 4 plum, some people call them Roma tomatoes. Could I use the other? Yeah, I like the flavor of these though. And you can see right here, this is just quite a bit from just 1 tomato, right? To give myself a little space though, I'm going to go ahead and just put these ones in the bowl. I can use my knife to help me a little bit. Just be careful not to cut yourself. Go ahead and start on our onion. And I've already peeled off the outside of the onion, okay? I'm just kind of cutting off the ends. Now, our recipe calls for about 1/4 a cup. So, depending on the size of your onion, this is a pretty small onion, but sometimes you get larger onions, just depending on what you pick up at the store. But this is pretty small. So we'll probably have to use a little more than half. If it's a good size onion, you might only have to do half. We can kind of check it with our measuring cup if we want. The recipe calls for 1/4 cup of onion. And don't worry if it's mixing with the tomato that's left over on your cutting board, because we're going to be mixing that anyways, right? So no big deal there. The more you can stack up onto each other, obviously the quicker it will go. Okay. So we'll check our amount here in a second and see how much we've got, because the recipe, like I said, calls for about 1/4 cup. And we'll just kind of see what ours comes out to be. If we need to add a little bit more, we could. Although I'm thinking that even looks like 1/4 cup, so let me grab mine. So I've got my 1/4 measuring cup, and we'll just see how we're doing. Oh yeah, this is gonna be plenty. And this was a fairly small tomato. Onion. So yeah, that small onion was more than enough on half of it. So just depending on what the grocery store has, we may need to even go less than that. I'm just slicing up a little bit thinner because I don't like a big chunk of onion. Actually, I'm not a gigantic fan of onions. But in this recipe, it all tastes so good together, complements each other so well that it doesn't bother me at all. And again, if you don't love onion, another idea is just to chop it super thin. Okay, I'm going to use my knife. Help me out here. Adding it to my bowl. Okay, and so I got a little bit left over. Like I said, this was a small onion and I have half at least. I should have a little left over. Use that for something else. And then I'm going to start on my cilantro. So cilantro is this green leafy spice here. I have rinsed this off, and that's what the paper towel is sitting on my countertop for. Is when I was done with it, I actually ended up like kind of patting it dry. And for the recipe, it calls for 3 tablespoons of chopped up fresh cilantro. It's kind of hard to judge that, but what I'm going to do is just get about 3 sprigs. And so when I say a sprig, I mean like one of these. Okay, and yes, you do chop up, a lot of students ask, do I chop up the stem part? Yes, you do. So that's fine to chop up the stem part. We want that included. Again, if you wanted to measure it out and be like, do I have enough? You could. That to me doesn't quite look like enough. So I'm gonna take a quick pause and get a little bit more from the fridge. Okay, so I had a little pause there to get a little bit more cilantro because that didn't seem like quite enough. Let's see how much I do have. So I'm gonna take my cut up amount, and that gave me about 1.5 is what it gave me. So I need a little bit more. So I went ahead and washed up, again, a little bit more cilantro. So I washed up a little bit more. And we'll chop this up. This will probably be a little too much, but that's okay. We'll check it and measure it out. It's a little hard to guess on these because everything's just a little bit different sized. Okay, so there would be 2, and this will definitely be my 3. So I've got enough here as long as I scoop it all up. Okay, so I've got that added. I'm going to rinse off a little bit. Okay, so next I'm going to get some jalapeno. And you may want to select some gloves to do this part because jalapenos leave a little bit of oil residue on your skin. And if you forget about that a little later on and you touch your eye, it might sting. So be very careful. And like I said, you may want to select some gloves to work with. So we're going to go ahead and cut off the end first. Okay. And then we're going to kind of split it in half. And I'm going to discard the top. Just toss that away. Now what makes it hot are the seeds and the jalapeno. Okay, so all those seeds in there. And what I can do is I can adjust that based on my personal preference. If I don't like it to be very hot, then I'm going to discard most of my seeds. Okay, so I can get rid of as many seeds as I want to, right? So I like spicy, but not too spicy. So I'm gonna get rid of some of this. Trying to use my fingers as little as possible because I don't have a pair of gloves here at home. And I don't want to accidentally sting myself. So I do have some seeds left in there. Okay, I do like some spice, so I'm gonna leave some in there. I think it almost makes it a little too bland if I don't put anything in there. So I want to have a little something. And I cut it in half so it doesn't rock on my cutting board, which is cool for safety, so I don't have to worry about it getting away from me. And the recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of this. So we'll, again, we can use our measuring spoon just to kind of help guide us. And I want to dice this up pretty thin. And I left a few seeds on purpose, right? Because I want it to be a little bit spicy. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I could go a little bit thinner if I wanted to. Just be careful of your fingers. I can also take it and go like this across it. Okay, I've got some more here. Cut up. And kind of see what this looks like pulled together. So I think I want to cut up the rest of this. Most likely I'll only need to use half. If I came up a little short, I could add some more. Okay, so let's check it. We're going to add in 1 and 2. So I have a little extra, so definitely don't need the whole half. But if I like a little extra spice, I can add a little bit more. I kind of like it, so I'm going to add just that last little bit. Okay, so you can adjust that obviously as you kind of want to. Let's move some stuff out of the way. I'm going to rinse my hands a little bit. So now we're done with the hard part, which is just all that cutting. So again, you might want to work as a group to get that all cut up, because that's what's going to take the biggest portion of your time. And I'm just going to kind of clear my space a little bit by moving some of this out of the way. And the rest is just basically going to be ingredients that I need to add. I could cut up my garlic, but I'm going to use the garlic that comes in the jar, which is perfectly fine to use, and I like it. It kind of saves me a little time. And I'm going to also add some lime juice and a little kosher salt. So that's all I have left to add. So let's go ahead and add those few things. Since I don't want to have to wash any more than possible, I'm going to use my teaspoon and first get my dry item, which is the salt. So I need 3/4 a teaspoon of salt. So I'm going to grab that. Okay, so we're going to add 3/4 a teaspoon of salt, and I have this cool little adjustable one I'm using today. And so I'm going to get my kosher salt, which is a little bit different because it's a lot more granular. And I am just going to scoop in. And then over the top of the box, I'm just going to level that off with the back of my knife. And add that to my salsa. Okay, so I've got that added. And now I'm going to also add 1.5 teaspoons of lime juice and 1 teaspoon of garlic. So I'm going to use my canned garlic, or jarred garlic, and get 1 teaspoon. So all I have to do is kind of dip in. And I could use a knife, or I'm just using the side of the jar. If I wanted to use fresh, I could. Just saving a little time here by doing that. Plus, I don't go through a whole lot of garlic and it goes bad, versus if I have the jar kind, it lasts a little bit longer. And then last, we're going to add some lime juice. So I need 1.5 teaspoons of this. So I don't want to necessarily measure over my bowl, because if I do, all that extra goes in there. So I'm just going to measure over my counter. And if I spill, I can always just get a towel and wipe it up. And there's 1. Then I have to adjust my spoon to where now it's 1/2. And add that. And then all that's left for me to do here is just to simply mix. So that's what I'm going to do. Use a wooden spoon, or I could just use my spatula, which I'm doing, or sorry, my rubber scraper. and just mix that up really, really well. What's going to happen is the salt's going to pull a lot of that liquid out of your tomatoes, which is good. So you get a little bit of liquid with it. And I'm just doing a really, really good job at mixing that. And that's what it should look like. Okay, so now I'm done, so I'm just gonna plate it up. I've got some tortilla chips here, and I've got my salsa. So I'm just gonna pour a little bit in my little custard cup. And you can see there is some liquid there. And now I'm ready to enjoy.